Acapulco, Mexico. This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I have probably the most wanted guest I've ever wanted to have on this program, Dr. Ron Paul, and it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have him on. And Dr. Paul, I have to tell you, I don't know if you know much about our program, but we generally interview anarchists, anarcho-capitalists, voluntarists, all sorts of peaceful people who believe in not aggressing against others. And the first question we ask everyone is, how did you become an anarchist or voluntarist? And I believe you are the top answer we've had of over 300 people that we've interviewed so far to date. So you've really influenced a lot of people to become voluntarists. So I wanted to ask you, what is your take? I know you've talked about anarchy in the past on C-SPAN. I've seen you talk about it. What is your general take on anarchy and voluntarism?
Well, I think that's the ultimate self-government that we have. Unfortunately, it hasn't been well tested throughout the millennia. So it to me is just a natural condition that we all should accept. I think we all are born with a bit of anarchy and libertarianism in us, that we are sovereign people, but it gets knocked out of us. That we're conditioned by our society and by our educational system, by our governments, by our movies, and we're taught that we should question it and that there's something wrong with you if you think that you're a sovereign person. But of course, I set that as the goal, and voluntarism and the rejection of any initiation of violence. And it adds up that we'd have a pretty peaceful world. And on top of that, we'd have a pretty prosperous world too. And I don't know how anybody can argue against that. I've always been bewildered why we as libertarian government people do such a poor job, because I think the message is so powerful. But the opposition is who controls the propaganda, and that's where we face difficulty, because those who benefit by using other people and taking other people's wealth, they end up controlling the message, and that's where we fall short. But today, like what we're doing right now, communicating and the work that you do, you talk to people, we really couldn't do that before. So the difference between what it was like in 1976 when I first went into Congress and over these years, it's been magnificent about the development and the encouragement and the understanding about what voluntarism is and why it's a moral issue. It's a practical issue, because if you want peace and prosperity, but quite frankly, there are too many people out there that just want stuff, and they want to be the boss, and they want to control everything. And those are our enemies that we have to contend with.
Yeah, absolutely. You were, of course, known as Dr. No in Congress. You voted no against virtually everything that talked about spending people's money or forcing people to do things. Did you go into Congress with the hope or with the notion that you could somehow reel back all of this large government stuff, or were you just trying to slow it down as much as possible?
Well, probably neither. I didn't expect to go into government, but I was looking for an opportunity. I was looking for an opportunity to participate in the debate. I was practicing medicine. I was very, very busy, but in the 1960s and even in the late 50s, I got fascinated with reading about Austrian economics and the monetary issue. And there was some cataclysmic events in the 1970s, like the breakdown of Bretton Woods, that really got me attentive. So I thought, the country's going in the wrong direction, but I never saw myself as going to Washington and change anything. Even after I sort of had a flukish victory and ended up in politics, my goal was never there to become a chairman of a board, because I thought it was always an ideological battle. And this gave me a place to speak out. And I always thought, well, I'll go to Congress, I'll do what I say, and we'll just see if they reelect me. And they did. So I still thought that a purpose that I was fulfilling was just to be there and maybe make a suggestion and set a standard of what we should be doing. And didn't expect a whole lot. I did not, somebody said, didn't you get awfully discouraged? And I said, no, never, because I had low expectations. I didn't believe I was going to make a difference, but I also understood the power of ideas. So that's what surprised me, is that the work of others, the people, the academicians, the people teaching in economics, they had laid a foundation, which a lot of people didn't realize was out there. And I think I sort of ignited that, and I received some benefits from that in 2008 and 2012 in those campaigns. And so I never dreamed there'd be that much attention given. But I think if we look at it in a logical way, I think it was very positive, and I was just in a place where I was able to bring people together because people's ideas started to change, and they're dramatically different. I had a congressman on my program today, and we talked about the Federal Reserve, and I told him, in 1976 when I went up there, the Federal Reserve was a saint. Today it's not. Everybody realizes its problems and why auditing the Fed at least is the right step in the right direction. So the ideas are changing, and I also work on the assumption that philosophically there's no difference between the two parties. And this whole idea that the answer to what our problems are in Washington is just if we have more bipartisanship. And that's my biggest complaint. They're bipartisan in all the evil things that they do. Just this week, putting these horrible sanctions on Russia and Iran. Yeah, they have their problems, but we have our problems too. But it was like a couple people would oppose it, and they were just marching lockstep into bipartisan, both sides. So if it's money issues, debt issue, welfare issue, military-industrial complex, fighting wars, attack on our privacy, it's very bipartisan. And when our views come across, which more libertarian anarchist type views, where we want individual sovereignty, it's going to be bipartisan. Politicians are a reflection of the status quo, the prevailing ideas of the people, and we've been lectured for 100 years to accept this monstrous idea that we need people to tell us what to do with our lives and with our money, and that we are obligated to tell other countries how to live. That is what's been going on, and quite frankly, I see an end to that coming. And I think that if people knew exactly the difference and they were offered, peace and prosperity through a non-violent, non-aggressive foreign policy versus what we have today, I think the people would accept it. But the big job we have, and it's getting easier, is getting a message out to show the difference and defend it on a moral basis. The moral defense of liberty is, very powerful. I used to complain that the two weakest arguments for any vote in the U.S. Congress would be a moral issue. What are you talking about? Or a constitutional issue. The Constitution certainly didn't hold government in check. But if you use that, their eyes glaze over. But if you talk about, well, which special interest groups support this, which lobbyists support this, all of a sudden they perk up. But I think the bottom line ought to be the moral issue of by what right does government have to use force to intimidate and steal from one group to subsidize another group. And if you get involved in the monetary system, you have exactly what was predictable. You have a system where you have a growing number of billionaires who can control the whole world. At the same time, you have half of the people not knowing what they're doing. They can't get jobs and they have a lot of debt, and there's this class warfare going on. It's going to get much worse. But that is a predictable event from a monetary system, which is unsound and regulated and controlled by people in secret. And if they have power to create money, they also have the authority to distribute the money. And lo and behold, we end up with a mess that we have today.
Yeah, absolutely. You said so much there. I want to get into a little bit on the Federal Reserve, which you brought up a lot. But before we get into that, it's interesting that you got into politics really with no interest in it, no hope to change too much. And then you ended up running for president in 2008, 2012, which really evoked sort of a revolution or a levolution as you were basically putting out there. You were filling up stadiums while your competitors were filling up high school classrooms. So my question to you on that was that it sounds like it was just you didn't necessarily expect to become president, but you were just trying to get those ideas out there, which you really did. But I wonder at one point when you're filling those stadiums, if you thought that you could actually win, and if you think that was sort of taken away from you in some way because it was obvious that you had so much more support than your competitors.
Some days I go, holy man, it could happen. And I also know what it means to change things up there. But that's a mixed bag, that whole argument. Did I do it for the ideas or did I do it to win? And when I started, I did it for the ideas, but I also wanted to win. Now, if I have a set I think are very, very important, I want them to be measured. So winning is a measurement of that. So I might be one that wins, but for the purpose of having power, I want to dissipate and get rid of the power and the structure. So yes, I think those people who, some people were very, think you're serious. We don't think you want to really win. Well, we were serious when we ran for Congress and we won, and I thought that gave a voice, a message for the ideas. And so therefore, I think I work just as hard as anybody else to maximize our efforts, but also, well, and it was catching on, large crowds coming out, we were also mistreated, you know, and there's a lot of admission to that by the other campaign. They weren't bashful about saying how we handled the Paul campaign. So, but that's just a sign of strength. But some people, you didn't work hard enough. I think that's untrue, but it's also true that my sole goal wasn't to be the president of the United States. Yes. And there's nobody going to wave a wand, and it wouldn't be easy to do. All you have to do is look at a couple people trying to be serious system. It's not going to happen, but the time is coming when this is going to all fall down, and we will have an opportunity to voice up this type of system would be like.
So many people wonder about your son, Rand Paul. Of course, you are talking a lot about, you were Dr. No in Congress. He, of course, is a little bit, he's not quite Dr. No. So a lot of people are wondering, is he very similar along the same sort of philosophy as you, or is he a little more what you call statist?
No, I wouldn't use that term because I think philosophically he'd be very, very close. I think when it comes to how to handle campaigning and what to do legislatively, you know, I think there is room for a little bit of differences of this. It's sort of like this. If we had an income tax that was 50% and we lowered it to 40%, should you vote for it? And I probably would vote for it. So I say, oh no, you're still voting for an income tax. Others would say, oh no, you're voting for it. It's something like that, that he's probably looks at things and say, well, if I can get a little bit, I'll do it. But my argument generally has been, if you give up, if you have pieces of legislation, they always sound so good, and they say 90% of it's good. Well, are you giving up 10% of your liberty at a time? Pretty soon it will add up. But I think it's sort of a tactical thing, but if you compare him to all the other senators, believe me, he far excels over the rest of the crowd.
That's great. And you brought up the Federal Reserve earlier. And of course, you were really one of the people that really started to draw attention to the Federal Reserve. And a lot of the end the Fed sort of movements really came from a lot of the things you were doing. And we're still at the point where they're still not even auditing the Fed. Do you ever see any hope for somehow reeling in what the Federal Reserve is capable of doing? Or do you think this is just going to keep going for more years and years more with no sort of limits on them, no sort of auditing and nothing at all? And definitely, obviously not making them just getting rid of the Federal Reserve completely. That's not even, doesn't even seem like an option at this moment in time. Do you see any sort of hope in that regard?
No, the politicians won't reel it in. When they voted, we had the votes several times now in the House, and we always win these votes for at least auditing. And my argument was, if you audit them and expose them, then they'll say, why do we have them? So that is the case, but they're not going to be reeled in. There's too many special interests, both Republicans and Democrats. They need it if you believe in big government, and nobody really believes that the Republicans are for less government, whether it comes to the welfare state, government in medicine and education, the warfare state especially. They're all in bed together, that they have been conditioned over many, many decades with the Keynesian notion that deficits don't matter and debt is not bad. If you have a weak economy, you spend more money and you print more money and all these things. They believe in that. They won't reel it in. And even if you wanted to, the big political problem is it's sort of like trying to get somebody out of an addiction. If they're addicted to drugs and you want to save the person's life and you're going to wean them off, it doesn't work very well. It's a really a tough fight. So they're not going to be weaned off. So the only thing we can do, is my opinion, from our position, is to spread the ideas of what it would be like if and when we need a replacement. So I believe the Fed will end, but it'll be self-destructive. It's not viable. And you see this in the media, in the business media now, the financial people are now talking about Fed's failing, interest rates are too low, too long, and they failed here and there, and how are they going to get rid of their balance sheet? And they're starting to know there's a big problem, but they're not going to do what is necessary. They're not going to cut back. If you did, you would hear Congress today talking about weaning the government off government medicine. So you can't wean the Federal Reserve off their powers if you need the Federal Reserve to keep the system going. The thing that keeps it going is this illusion that the dollar is eternal, that we will always have the control of printing the reserve currency of the world, and that others will take it and they'll sell us their stuff and they'll take our paper money and then they'll take our money and our dollars and buy our debt and keep us going. And it's been sort of a miracle for the financial markets here, not for the people in this country, but it's been working. But that cannot last. If the theory worked, why should the producers of the reserve currency, mainly the Americans, why would we ever have to work again? Why don't they just print more money, and hand it out? Everybody knows there's a limitation, and that's what we're up against. That's why I think the big correction didn't start in the recession of 08 and 09. I think the big change came in the 2000 bust. And that if you look at real wages and different things since 2000, there's been nothing there to be encouraged by. So it is ending. We've started it, but the total end of it will be like a crash. And right now, the dollar is down 9%. No big deal. It's done that before. But what if 9 becomes 18? And some people get annoyed with us with our involvement overseas, interfering with the marketplace, and get annoyed with what we're doing. They might have it in their interest to crash the dollar, and I think they're capable of doing it. That will end the Fed, but all central banks work together. We don't work in a vacuum, because the globalists, depend on the integration of all the central banks. And there's a lot of power there to keep it going, but there's a lot of politicking going on too that are getting pretty disgusted with us. But even if they don't precipitate it, I think it's not a viable system. You just can't, the creation of monetary digits out of thin air does not produce wealth. You have to work and produce things to have wealth. So I think the Fed is going to go. We won't actually have a real audit, but it's very important we talk about transparency of the audit and explain to people how the system really works. And you're getting a government that is doing nothing but harm to you. There's still a lot of the people say, I get free medical care. Why do you want me to get rid of Obamacare? And with that lasting, it's going to take a while yet, but it will come. This system will collapse, and it will be a real challenge on what we replace it with. And I think maybe we're on the right track, because California is talking about secession, and maybe we can reduce the size and scope of our individual governments, and that would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually write something called the Dollar Vigilante, where I talk about the end of all fiat currencies and the collapse of the dollar coming in the next few years. And many people used to ask me what will be the replacement for things like the dollar. And I said at the time, because Bitcoin hadn't been invented yet, that I didn't know. But now Bitcoin's out there. I was just wondering really briefly, I know you're very busy, if you had any comments on your thoughts on Bitcoin.
I don't understand it well enough to have a firm belief in it. I have some reservation because of the lack of understanding, but I have a very strong position on how it should be treated. And that is, if it's voluntary and it doesn't involve fraud, people ought to be able to use anything they want as a medium of exchange. And if that satisfies some people, it should be illegal. How could anything be more fraudulent than our system? What we have to do is make the dollar system illegal. So no, I think it should be legal. I want the monetary unit to be voluntary. If you go back to the regressive theory about the origination of money, it always goes back to a commodity. And history is on the side, the position I take that, gold and silver for 6,000 years has been known to be used as a medium of exchange. And I'm not going to do anything to repeal that, but I don't care. Matter of fact, it only works when the people accept it. So if we have a chaotic system with the dollar system, it has to be legal for the people to pick and choose what they want to use for a medium of exchange.
Absolutely. Great comments. I know you're busy. I want to let you put in a little plug for what you're doing there, the Ron Paul Liberty Report. I also want to ask you at the same time, maybe you can combine them both, how you keep going with this much energy and keep doing what you do at your age, and not to say that you're super old, but a lot of people at your age aren't doing as much as you're doing. So it's really amazing what you do. You're now doing the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Maybe just comment on how you're able to do all this stuff and put in a plug for what you're doing now.
Well, I like to feel good physically and mentally, and you have to be active to do that. So I do a lot of exercising, and these morphine-like drugs that come from our own body from exercising is my tranquilizer, and it makes me feel good. But no, I'm energized by the issues and the ideas. I think they're fascinating. When I talk to those large crowds, I said, if you're interested in that, don't expect miracles. You're not going to change the world in a day, but associate with like-minded people, and have fun doing it, and feel like you're doing something in a positive way. So I do a lot of work with the Ron Paul Liberty Report, which is my internet program. I do interviews on it and talk about on a daily basis the important issues. Most of it is on foreign policy, since it's so significant, that, and of course the Federal Reserve and spending and all the problems that we have. And right now we're getting ready to hold a conference, I think it's the 8th and 9th of September, on foreign policy issues up at the Dulles Airport. People interested in that could go to my RonPaulLibertyReport.com and get information.
Great. We'll make sure to have the links to all that down below. And just so you know, Dr. Paul, we have our own conference every year right here in Acapulco, Mexico, called Anarchapulco, which is the largest gathering of voluntarious minds in the world. We had over 500 last year. We're expecting maybe 1,000 in 2018. And you're always invited if you ever should decide you'd like to check it out. As I pointed out, a lot of the people who are into these sort of things nowadays became interested in them because of you. So you've really engendered an entire movement here. So it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you on. I thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're so busy, and I just want to let people know that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Please like, subscribe, and share this video. Of course, I think so many people will be sharing with the great Dr. Paul on today. And that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
In a world where Antifa riots in the city streets, cops rage out of control, and the leader of the free world is a fat-ass casino owner, one event stands alone to make anarchy great again.
I actually love humanity. That is why I'm an anarchist.
Backwards in the building like we the ceiling, we illin'. No matter who find it appealing, I'm here and I got a feeling that we'll be dealing a lot of pain where the penicillin get drilled in your head. That we are monsters and yeah, we come from the slums, and for months we've been pumped, but for once I am now comfortable. I want to grow, I want some more success, and I want to know that greatness can't be rushed, can't be lost, so face the bus. Feel free to hate on us, we lace them up. Dudes, we done paid them up. Keep snakes away from us and safe from us, you might wanna be. Remember when clowns used to make fun of me and that they wanna be me, see me and they run at me. I'm gonna be the greatest, yeah I wanna be, but I am not the wanna be the fakest for the sake of being played. I'm here like I never left, said to hell, nah, cause I can't just fail. So just prepare your ears, it'll get for real. Take from here, we will never take the cell, it's grind time. My mind and my thoughts, my highs and my faults, my wins and my loss. When will I fall off? It's a test for me. You are now listening to Veracity. Yeah.
Fuck the media, fuck the banks, fuck drone strikes, fuck tanks, fuck hunger, fuck war, fuck ignoring of the poor, fuck the left, fuck the right, fuck the government. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.